Hello, and welcome to this quest design primer, an introduction to quest design concepts. First, we'll go over what quest design is, then we will discuss how to use quest design, and then we'll talk about other concepts related to quest design. A little bit about me. My name is David Taveras. I'm the quest designer for Occupational Hazard LLC, a collaborative game studio. I develop games such as iWoman, a third-person shooter that you can now find on Steam, and the upcoming Deception Falls, which is a narrative RPG currently in development. I'm a member of the Unreal Fellowship, having been certified in animation and world building. I'm also the IT lead for Gen Con LLC, which is the world's longest running tabletop gaming convention. I'm also a veteran storyteller and quest designer with over 20 years of RPG experience. What is quest design? Like a lot of terms in the gaming industry, the term quest design can mean different things to different people. A nice ad hoc definition of it would be the art and science of planning game objectives. It can also be known as mission design or objective design. There's other phrases that might also be used for it. Sometimes it's part of just a more general game designer subcategory, and other times it's drilled down to be a specific specialty that someone holds a title to. That's the title I like to give myself. And I'll give my personal definition at the end of the primer. That way I can see who's made it that far. What's the purpose of quest design? Quests give the player something to do. The quest itself assigns a goal for the player to accomplish. It is generally considered an essential component of game design. Now, not every game has a very complex quest design. Sometimes it's simple, it just shows you how to play the game. But other games, you will have individual tasks within the game, and that's generally more what we are talking about when we're talking about quest design. To be more specific, let's drill down to quest design mediums, where you can find quest design. A choose your own adventure book, there's certain resolutions you're looking for. That could be said to be a quest. Board games have a core objective that you're trying to achieve. More complex modern board games especially have a lot of side objectives that can be said to be quests. Tabletop role-playing games, often you'll be given quests by characters, or even just central motivations for your characters could be said to be quests. Simulations and exercises, an example of this would be like a military training exercises. There's a clear goal, and achieving that goal could be said to be a quest or mission. Of course, today we're talking more about video games and the types of quests you can find there. Like any other design discipline, quest design follows a process. This wheel that you can see on the screen behind me demonstrates how it's a cyclical and iterative process. You start at the top there where you define the problem. What's the type of quest that you're going to design for this particular game? Then you create solutions, you design said quests, you draw them out, make all the plans. Then you actually make the quest within the game. That's the craft prototype space. Then you test the quest. See if it works with everything that you're trying to achieve and if the game functions correctly. You have to understand the feedback you get from QA and maybe other testers or just other developers. And then you run through the cycle until you believe you've achieved an amount of perfection that's acceptable to be a quest in your game. This, of course, begs the question, how do you design these quests? You should start with a master quest design document. That's a central planning document for your quest design. It's a stable reference point and style guide. These are decisions you need to make early on. What is a quest of your type of game? What kind of goal should the player achieve? What are you trying to give as an experience to anybody who plays the game? Within this document, you should also have references to a tracking system, and make clear goals, measurements of success, that you successfully made a quest and that you successfully achieved the total vision of the game. There should be definitions, the scope of what a quest is, how long or short it is, what systems it implements, that sort of thing. Make sure there's clear definitions of terms as well that you're going to be using in reference to your specific quest systems or other tangential systems that are involved in your quest. It's also good to have a solid timeline with estimates and what tools you will be using and resources also in this document. And there will also be individual quest design documents for each quest as you progress and make any number of quests. Your game could have a single quest, there's just one objective to achieve. It could have 1,000 quests that get picked up at different points. And I recommend having an individual quest design document that matches and reflects your master quest design document for every single one of those quests, if you have a lot of them, of course. More than one. Quest design does not exist in a vacuum. You'll have to collaborate with the other disciplines in developing a game. If it's a small studio, this might be all done by a single person. However, if it's a very large studio, each one of these different departments might have dozens or even hundreds of people in it. So let's go through and talk about each type of collaboration with all of these different departments. I'd say that collaboration with narrative and writers is going to be very tight and intimate. You're going to have to know what the story is quite well if you're going to match the quest to the story, the plot of the game, assuming it has one. Systems and gameplay is another close relationship because these systems are going to have to interact with your quest, and that's going to be the bread and butter and makeup of your quest to tell the story using the systems. Level and environmental art design, that's another close relationship you're going to have as a quest designer because this is the space that these quests are going to be taking place in. If there's going to be travel, moving from one area to another, that's going to have to be accounted for. The scene itself is going to have to help tell the story with narrative. Quest design is probably one of the highest collaborative disciplines there is in game design because it interacts with just about everything, including audio and dialogue. Again, just like with storytelling, there's going to be ambient sounds. There's going to be a lot of quests that do have dialogue will integrate deeply into that narrative, so you have to make sure that the dialogue happens at the right time. You might even want to work directly with the people doing, say, sound capture or mocap. That's the next one here, animation and mocap, to make sure that characters interact correctly and tell the story you're trying to work with. And that's what you're going to be collaborating between all of these levels, systems, writers. There's a lot of deep collaboration where you all have to be on the same page and make sure that it's all flowing. And that rests on the shoulders of the quest designer. You're the intermediary between all of these. And that includes like UI and UX, something that the player will see that the characters generally don't. UI is user experience, user interface. That's like the little widgets you'll see on the screen, like buttons and pop-ups and, like meters and bars that show up. UX is the user experience of how easily and intuitive it is to use these things, making sure that it's smooth and easy to understand. You'll also have to be working with producers and management, the higher-ups. They're going to have a vision that they want this all to come together, and if there is a weak point in any of this development, it does fall on the quest designer to make sure that they pick up the slack there and that the vision is achieved, and that it's clearly communicated to the other departments. You cannot put the blame on anybody else if there's something wrong with the quest. That's your responsibility as the quest designer. You need to figure out how to get it fixed to make sure that the vision is complete. And that goes to even deeper levels like programming and code, making sure that whatever engine you're using is handling it, and that the optimization is there, and if there are tools, if you require tools that aren't developed yet, that's clearly communicated as well, and that it's a very collaborative effort. And once you actually get some quests out there, throw them off to a QA. Make sure you're playing the quests yourself, of course. to make sure you find any bugs, or if that is being communicated correctly, the story that is, making sure that it's communicated correctly. But also talk to the testers. Try to get their unbiased feedback on what's going on. Maybe you're trying to tell a story and like the plot's not coming through at all. So just ask the testers what they thought of something. And don't even lead them. Just ask what they thought of it. And if they're not saying the things that the writers are trying to express, then maybe there's a problem with some of the implementation. Maybe there's some things you can tweak and make that more clear. Also, quest design, I'd say you probably don't often work directly with marketing and community, like community managers and that sort of thing, but it's very useful if you do, because quests are a great way to showcase the narrative of the story and give people a feel of the gameplay to understand what some quests are. A lot of the biggest games will show in like their promo for their game just a little snippet of a short little quest that gets the essence of the entire game, so people know what to expect and they're not blindsided when they start playing. I thought the game would be like this, and the gameplay will be very clear if you show a little short quest in action. And of course, you got to work with other quest designers. You don't want to overlap efforts with them. If you're building a tool and they're building the same tool, that's going to be a waste of resources. Collaborate with them. Make sure your quests aren't overlapping. Like if they kill off a character and your quest's after theirs and is hinging on that character, that's a problem. So you got to coordinate closely with anyone else holding the title of quest design as well. There's a lot of potential for overlap and bumping into each other, but there's also amazing opportunities to help each other out and build the same tools and like add to each other's stories, or to have their quest affect yours and your quest affect theirs. Lots of great opportunities there. As I mentioned, the organization size can affect your collaborative efforts as a quest designer as well. If you're going solo, that means everything's on your shoulders. That includes your quest design, but also, level design, UI, UX, programming, everything. So it's something you still should consider, and this video would be highly valuable for you. But the collaborative effort would be more applicable to teams. If it's a smaller team, maybe one person will be the game designer, so there's a lot of other things they'd be not responsible for. Perhaps maybe animation and marketing and sound is other people doing that. But if you're a game designer, then quest design is still on your shoulders. If there are departments that have quest design, then it's on your shoulders at that point. But at the same time, that means you have to collaborate with a bunch more people, because game design is such a collaborative effort. There's a lot of other disciplines that interact with your discipline. So if you have a lot of departments, especially if it's a big like interdepartmental thing and there's like a huge game and it's a big open world and there's all these different things, communication is key for quest design. If you're not communicating, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. You got to keep your finger on the pulse, stay informed, and make sure that everyone knows and your team knows what you're doing, and that you understand what other people are up to. And that they're all following the same standards, and that they are all on the same timeline, that kind of thing. Sometimes companies get big enough where some of these professionals are working on multiple projects too, so you have to keep in mind that their time is valuable. And it takes a lot to make something great, and sometimes organization size makes it so you got to make sure that you take extra time to schedule out your calendar. Quest design involves a goal the player has, interactions with the gameplay, so that even comes down to the very basics of input and output, the devices that you use to even play the game. So how you design a quest can be dependent partly on which device the game is on, whether it's mobile or PC or VR, AR, XR, because that's how the player will be interacting with your world, and you want to make sure that the way that things interact match what you're trying to achieve with the vision of the game. So even consider things like controllers, touchscreens, mouse and keyboards, how this is going to affect quests. If you're going to, let's say your vision is that this is supposed to be a very, very easy encounter, but the touchscreen makes it almost impossible to accomplish. That's something you need to be accounting for. So always look at every device, whether it's input or output, whatever screens or VR headsets they're using, whether it's mouse and keyboard or a controller that they're controlling it with, or any other, weird new thing that, the industry develops. And this plays directly into accessibility. Make sure that you can the widest number of players possible have the easiest amount of time. Always consider that in your design. Now let's pivot to types of quests. Now this is a non-exhaustive list. However, it is there's quite a few here. So like travel quests. The player has to get the character from point A to point B, see these awesome mountains, travel this valleys, sail across the sea, something like that. There's the much dreaded escort quest, where you bring a character along with you traveling somewhere. This is often dreaded for a couple reasons. Because a lot of the times either the AI can get someone killed easily, and that frustrates a lot of players. If that's your intent, then go for it. However, there's a couple ways to solve that. Either make it so that the AI that's controlling whoever you're escorting isn't targeted first, or there's more scripted scenes to exactly how that works. The other big frustration with escort quests is sometimes the character's movement rate is a little bit different than your player's movement rate, so that it's like between your run and walk. So you got to run, stop, walk a little bit, but then they're faster than you, then you run and you're faster than them, and that frustrates a lot of people too. So make sure you sync that kind of thing as well. Sometimes if you make a system that if you want the escort person to follow you, maybe just set it so that it's only a certain distance from you, or something simple like that, rather than it's just on a specific speed that's different than your character's. And sometimes those speeds, you might think they're the same, but maybe different processors work a different way, or different devices, or their personal input device works slightly different, and that goes back to testing with the input and output devices. I spent a lot too much time on the escort quest. Fetch quest, this is another one that's not liked too much, because it's just sending you back and forth. I recommend putting a narrative aspect with a fetch quest. Like, don't just, hey, go get me an apple. And it's like, why did I do that? Is that fun? Make sure it's something that works with the story. Similar ideas, collect quests, where there's like a whole bunch of things maybe they generate in the worlds that you got to pick up, or like you loot from a creature or something like that. There's the delivery quest, similar concepts to both travel and the collect quests, where whoever's giving you the quest gives you the item, and you lose the item once you make it to the destination. You're like, here you go, I delivered it to you. Interact quests, also a similar idea, where you just go to a spot and simply interact with something. There's combat quests, kill X number of monsters, defeat this guy, that sort of thing. That's more popular. Stealth quests, similar, except you're avoiding creatures rather than fighting them. Sometimes it leads into the others. A lot of these quests can be combined. Maybe you're delivering something from point A to point B, which involves travel, but there's monsters along the way, and you can stealth past them, or you can fight them. Or maybe, the last one there, social, maybe you'll be able to talk your way out of it. There's social quests. And then the one I skipped there was puzzle. That could be a harder thing to develop, because the puzzle has to be of a certain amount of difficulty, where it's actually still is a puzzle. It's difficult enough to be called a puzzle, but at the same time, probably you don't want it to be too unsolvable, where someone has to look it up in the internet. You want the player to feel smart, usually. Unless it's just a puzzle game, and the puzzles just ramp up, and that's just the point of the game. But in a lot of like RPGs, you probably want to keep the puzzles simple enough where you don't have to be a genius to finish the game with a puzzle in the way. What genres of games have quests? All types of games can have quests. Action games, combat quests are common in those. Also, travel quests, kill a certain number of things. It is possible to have stealth in action games, even though that seems like less action. Adventure games will have a lot of fetch quests or interact quests. Normally those are inventory based, so you're always picking stuff up and using them on things, and that's in a way a sort of a puzzle on its own. Narrative games will have a lot of social quests. Sometimes they'll have other aspects of like puzzles and things, but that's like very social heavy genre. That'd be like a visual novel or something like that. It could be a narrative game, and there's other types as well. Puzzle games, of course, puzzle quests. Sometimes puzzle games will include other things, like where you have to find something on the screen and click on it, and that's kind of like a collect quest as well. Sports games. So the sports themselves can be seen as a quest. Sometimes there's other achievements and stuff for doing like side things, like get a certain number of touchdowns within a certain number of time. But just winning a game, winning a race itself could be considered a quest. Your mission or objective, that for that matter. Strategy games. This has sometimes there's multiple ways to win in a strategy game. Sometimes you have to defeat your enemy through combat. Other times there can be like Civilization has like a religion victory, a cultural victory, a science victory, where you just blast off a rocket to Alpha Centauri instead. And someone might be conquering the world, and like your last city's holding out and launches that rocket to Alpha Centauri, and it's like, you did better at conquering, but technically I made a win condition first. So it's an alternate quest route. Now, the type of game that I like to make, and is going to be the focus of this talk, because I believe it is the more of a focus of quest design, are role-playing games, because role-playing games often have quests in a very straightforward way. You'll have like quest markers and a quest log, and people will give you quests, so it's very more straightforward in that type of game. Quests in role-playing games generally further a plot, whether it's a subplot or the main plot to the game. Quests are also the main way to advance. A lot of role-playing games will have some sort of leveling system, or you gain powers as you progress through the game, and quests are like the mile markers on that. Achieving quests or going through quests, whether it's like experience points based, or you just achieve certain milestones which grants you certain things. Sometimes there's loot involved, whether it's a reward or just things you pick up as you complete quests, depending on the type of game, of course. And also something to mention here is that quests are an excellent opportunity to make choices matter. Meaning that, let's say you have got a choice to kill or spare a character. What are the consequences to that? Is this someone who's vile enough that if you spare them, then you lose another character in the game? Or is it just a matter of, let's say you off that character, now you're just a bloodthirsty evil person? Possibly both of those things could be true. So that would add a lot of gravity to an interaction like that. The reason you gave them that choice is because you wanted to add some gravity to the story, make a quest more memorable. And something that's important to remember about making choices matter is that you need to telegraph it when those choices matter. Something like the example I just gave, if you let that character go and he kills a character, make sure that it's brought up in the story, not just, if you went to their apartment and you see that they're dead. That's one way of doing it, but that's more subtle. Maybe like the quest says, go meet that person to turn in the quest, and it resolves with you finding that they're dead. Telegraph it well so that the player understands that there were consequences, or that their choice mattered. Along the same lines as telegraphing that your choices matter, there are ways to track choices through continuity. Sometimes the game will have factions, and they will have some sort of like approval rating for your character. That's one way to do it. Sometimes individual NPCs will have some sort of approval rating. Sometimes it gets extreme, and there's a relationship. Maybe it's not just an NPC, but like a companion for the game. Or even the more extreme version of that is if they're romanceable, and you have to get their approval rating high enough to engage in that romance. Now, some players don't like that sort of thing, so make sure that's optional if it's in your game, unless, of course, the point of the game is to be a romance game. You don't have to change the genre of your game for the players, but for whoever you are targeting to play this game, definitely make sure that there is a wide option as possible. I believe that it's best quest design to allow for choices as much as possible, and these are some of the ways to track that. On the exact opposite side of that coin, there's opposition, NPCs that are disfavorable to you, whether you lost reputation with that faction or if they were just enemies to begin with. There are characters that will have to be involved in the quests that will involve conflict. Now, if it's a game that involves combat, that's a very simple, easy, understandable form of conflict. However, there are maybe games that involve only social, and they're just someone who badmouths you, talks bad behind your back, or needs to be convinced of something otherwise. Conflict doesn't always have to be about violence. And when it's about violence, it doesn't always have to be about death. But that's not to say that a game can't be great with a lot of violence and death. Just make sure that it matches your game and matches your quest design. And you might even want to change that for one quest if it's going to add to the uniqueness of a quest. Maybe your game is all about violence, but you decide that in this one quest they have an option to take someone down non-violently. That could add to a lot of interesting experiences and variety within your quest design. Also, make sure that there's some sort of progression. I mean, some games you're just doing the same thing over and over, but usually you want to have it varied up, whether the story is progressing or if it's a game where your character levels and it shows some clear progression. Give a player some way to measure and motivate them to show accomplishment. Now, here's a quest design concept that I like to discuss, and it's often discussed, but a lot of people assume that there's only one way to do this, but it's actually quite the wide variety of ways that this could be accomplished. So I call it the open world conundrum. And it doesn't apply just to open worlds, because very linear games, that is a type of what I'm talking about here. It's the freedom versus intent. So total freedom would be a completely open world, so you can do anything, complete sandbox, but then you're just doing the anything as the player, and that's the opposite of intent, what the visionaries of the game were trying to do with this game, other than, being able to do everything, or what, the writers, the stories they were telling. If you're trying to tell a story and the character just, walks the other way, well, then the story doesn't get heard. But if you hold them there, that could make the player feel railroaded, and their agency feels like it's been taken away. But if there's a bunch of different stories, there's a happy medium, and you can choose which way you go and choose what you are involved with and what your choices are in these stories, then the player could feel like there's freedom. Not complete freedom, just to walk away from the whole situation. Although some games, I think Far Cry does that pretty well, where there's often an option to not even play the game, just leave, and that's a satisfactory ending to the game. But you don't get a lot of quests out of that, right? It's just the one. So let me talk a little bit about linear. That's the fully railroaded. You're just going through, a lot of games like walking simulators, they call them, where it's just you're just following the story path. You could try to do other things, but you're just often blocked off from doing them. Then there's branching, where you're given a couple different choices. You're still going to end up at point B, but there's a whole bunch of diversions and different ways to have gotten there. That's a little bit easier to design. And then you get to more of the open worlds designs, where there's a more restrictive open worlds design, where it's like a hub. You can't go literally anywhere in the world. You start in one location. I think Cyberpunk 2077 was interesting because it is an open world game, but it actually starts as a hubbed game because you're isolated to your origin area, whichever, whether you're that street kid, corpo, or nomad. That's a hub for you, wherever your starting zone is. You can't leave that. You got to finish that scenario. And then you're stuck in another hub because the police have cordoned off a section of the town. So you're stuck there until you get to a certain spot, and then the world opens up. A lot of open world games go by that model, like Fallout, for example. You'll often start in a vault, and that's a tiny little section that you have to go through the story first, and then there's this great moment in every Fallout game where the doors open to the Fallout shelter, and you see the world, and it's bright, and it's open, and you get this, oh wow moment. But some games can't really afford to build an entire open world where you can go anywhere. So once you've decided to have an open world, even a hub-based open world, and there's places that they can go and make choices to, this is where the conundrum comes in. This is where the problem comes in. Because let's say you do have some sort of advancing system. How do your quests matter now? Let's say there's an early game quest where you have to do a simple task. What happens if you don't find that quest until the end game? And the reason you didn't find it is because you walked in the other direction, which is perfectly fine because it's an open world game. This gets solved usually by scaling quests. That's what Skyrim's done, and some other games have done as well, where the world will level with you, but the problem with that is you don't feel like you're progressing if the enemy is always just as hard, because as you get stronger, the enemies also get stronger, and you don't feel like you're progressing because you're always at the same level, whether you're down here or you're up here. Now, cool new abilities and stuff like that. Another way that people have tried to solve that is to make it so that there's scaling on one level, but not scaling on the other, like treating your main quest differently than the open world quests or side quests, where some are partly scaled and some aren't. Now, the way I like to design this, and my thought and philosophy on this, is that you should play around with a bunch of variations with that, scaling versus, just this is just the quest and this is hard how it is. It's supposed to be an easy quest. Because that can also give them power fantasy, right? If they find it later and it's a weak encounter, but you're super powerful, maybe you're trying to play into that power fantasy. And that's what I'm getting at. Intent matters more than just the system. You can't say that this one way is right for all games. This is superior. It's based on intent. What do you want the player to feel at that moment? And make sure that whatever your systems are, match that. And that's the solution. My solution to that conundrum is design the game so that it plays the way that matches the vision. So it's where the freedom and intent match as much as you can. And another concept here I threw on the bottom, little asterisk there, 40-second rule. So this is a concept to know in an open world game when dealing with quests. Normally there's supposed to be something that you find, because players running around in an open world, it's awesome, it's fun. Now you're just running around. You want something to do. So that's why some studios have either a 30-second rule, 40-second rule, 50-second rule, where that's roughly the amount of time they want you to be traveling, whether you're running or riding a motorcycle, depending on whatever game is, however your mode of travel is, before you have an encounter. And then an encounter generally is a type of quest. So that's how far you should, so you get to explore and see the beautiful art, and all the optimization that the developers have worked on, and how amazing the world building is. But you shouldn't make it so that the player has to travel all day in real life just to get to their location. 40 seconds is usually about right. Now, when you travel somewhere in real life, obviously it usually takes more than 40 seconds. Attention spans can't, wait the 5 hours it takes to fly a plane from point, like across the United States, for example. But 40 seconds is a good amount of time where you felt like, yeah, I've traveled, but let's do something now. So that's the 40-second rule. Something I did just bring up was that there's different categories of quests. Quests ranking, I'm calling in this slide. So, like, main quests will be like the core story. When you finish the main quest and all the quests associated with it, normally that means you've won the game. That's why it's the main quest, is because that's the core of what the game is. Side quests are generally things that are completely optional, have their own self-contained stories. Sometimes there's series and levels to it, like the main quest. Sometimes there isn't. But generally, you do it once, you experience a story. There's also repeatable quests in some games. A lot of MMOs, for example, like to do repeatable quests where you do it just for like experience or loot or reputation with a faction or something like that. Generally, they're really simple quests, like collect a certain number of things, kill a certain number of monsters, solve a certain number of puzzles or something like that. Don't require a lot of writing. Maybe AI in the future will make that seem a lot more dynamic. But right now, they generally are kind of monotonous, but some people just, they like to play their game, and that's fine. Some people just like to do tasks, like me right now, making a video that's a primer on game design. This is a very unique niche task for somebody to do. So no judgment. And then finally, procedural quests. Any of the above could be procedural quests. These are ones that aren't fully scripted and written by somebody, but rather they're within a certain number of bounds. A lot of repeatable quests end up being procedural quests to make them a little bit more exciting. So that's just in the code, like rolling some dice, basically, on how, randomizers, on what the objective is. Like, today, quest is going to be, roll some dice, kill 3 pigs in the woods, something like that. But theoretically, a main quest could be procedural. That way, no two playthroughs would be the same. If there's a lot of work and thought that goes into that, that could actually be a very fulfilling experience to have a unique story that's procedural. I would say maybe not the main quest, but more like side quests of like the Shadow of Mordor with that Nemesis system. I guess you could call the Nemesis sort of like a side quest to your interactions with them, and that was quite procedural. The way that worked is that your orc nemesis would have a certain traits, and depending how you defeated them or they defeated you, and what your interactions was, whether you ran away from them, they would continue to grow and evolve with you with a storyline. So it was like a subplot, a B-plot. And that would be unique to you because they started off procedural, and their interactions based on your actions also have some random factors as well, which made that particularly fun. Quest length is also a paramount consideration because quests are going to take a certain amount of time. And that's something that needs to be agreed upon probably in your quest design document. Make sure that the quests match that certain number of length. Generally, you want quests to come in different segments. If it needs to be longer, often you'll break it up into different segments. Rather than say your quest is to conquer this kingdom, you can say, well, quest A is to conquer, this portion of the kingdom. Quest B is to rescue the princess. Quest C is to slay the dragon. Quest D is defeat the evil overlord, and now you've conquered the kingdom. Rather than just say, just conquer the kingdom, do all those things, and it takes you all day to do it. It's better to break out those objectives. This should be considered both individually and collectively. So a single quest might only be, maybe you say that side quests shouldn't take any longer than 20 minutes, but no less than 5 minutes or something like that. That's an example. Or you can say, that applies to all quests as well. or they have a different standard based on the type of quest it is. Also, quests might themselves be timed. Maybe it's like a hard, like, well, you've got the part of the quest is you got to do this in 20 minutes or you fail. Or do quests last forever? Can you wait 1,000 days, even though someone says, like, hey, rescue my dog from this well? But it could be an evergreen quest. Maybe that's part of your design in this game, is that you don't want to pressure the player to actually do the thing. And if you wait 10 months and the dog's still in the well, it's still in the well, and so you can go and save it later. No matter how perpetual that is. Time is a factor in the quest itself. Sometimes that can change the outcome. Maybe it's not a perfect fail state. Maybe waiting is to your advantage. That's something to consider when you're designing a quest. Or maybe a time of day, for example. Maybe you're supposed to complete the quest at night, and so you wait for the day-night cycle to go. And it's not about time running out, but a specific time of day where you can actually accomplish that. Witcher 3 actually did that with some quests where you can fight monsters, and depending whether it's day or night, or if it's raining or whatnot, that can affect the difficulty, and that adds a lot of flavor to the world, which was a great quest design. Something to consider is, where do quests come from in your game? How does the player receive the quests? Is it just a little pop-up in the side that says this is what you're doing next? Are you conversing with NPCs and they give you a quest? Is it something that you choose to do in a menu and select to say, this is now my motivation? These are things to consider. Something that's common are the quest givers, like people... there's the universal symbol of the exclamation point. Oh, that's out of my bounds. Exclamation point over your head, usually a yellow exclamation point for your general quests, and sometimes a blue exclamation point for repeatable quests. And that's a sign that there's somebody that has something for you to do. An objective, a mission, a quest. There's also like mission logs. Often there's a user interface that you can pull up and see what quests that you have. Some games let you actually even choose and accept quests there, or even reject and cancel quests. Hidden quests. Not every quest is telegraphed to you. Sometimes it's just something that you can achieve. Something that you can just do. And a lot of players appreciate this, but it also means that you're intentionally not telegraphing it well to reward players for choosing discovery and seeking out every little, nook and cranny of the game. And that's a choice. I do often have secret levels in my games, and in a way that's kind of a hidden quest, because I don't tell the player to do it, but if they do, then they get rewarded with something no other player gets to see, other than people that know where the hidden quest is. In fact, the game iWoman, to this date, I have heard no reports of anybody finding the secret level, and it's a doozy. Let's talk a little bit about explicit versus implicit. So explicit, that means that you're told. So that's like the quest giver and the mission log telling you where to go. These are explicit things. Kill this monster. Travel to this town. Implicit, these are things that, are... Maybe it's a hidden quest. Maybe you see that, I found the murder weapon, but I see there's also a letter on the table, but my quest doesn't say anything about the letter on the table. What if I read it? That's kind of an obvious sign that if you're looking at in a murder site, that you'd probably want to read that clue. But if it's just kind of like assume something that you can miss, that can add to an entire whole new quest chain that you might have missed. Actually, you know what? I think Witcher 3 did that pretty well. There was one quest where you're going after someone who's like murdering young women. And you can falsely accuse the guy who's the obvious example if you don't find some clues and make some extra conversation points. And that's a good example of that. Pacing is another great consideration when designing a quest. If a quest is too slowly paced, the player can lose interest. If it's too quick, rapidly paced, then the player might not understand what happened. You should make sure that progression happens in tandem with the intent of the level of tension as well. Tension being, in a way, almost like a threat. It's not necessarily combat. A lot of combat, a lot of fast-paced combat could be high tension. That's a little bit of, tension being like a stress on the player. But it also can mean maybe a very intense conversation that you don't want to go wrong. Maybe you're accused of something and you're like, no, I need to say the right thing so that they believe me that I didn't do this thing. If it's like someone that the player allegedly cares about, and they're coming down on you hard, that can be a very high tension moment as well. So you should track the time that it takes you to accomplish something, and the order in which you accomplish different steps in the quest against the tension, because it's usually best to have ups and downs, not to keep the tension exactly the same at the entire quest chain, or even steps within the quest. A good place to start is at low tension. You can start at high tension, where just as soon as you get there, just like everyone's attacking you from left and right. But generally you want to build it up. Draw this out in a graph, and down and up, and where it changes is where the tone changes, and usually the point of progress is, if you hit a high tension moment and then there's like a medium tension or a low tension, and then it starts going up again, both that high point and that low point are usually major milestones in the quest progression. Also, alternate paths. I would recommend charting that out as well, because there might be the core path, the happy path that you expect most players to do, but maybe players... this is actually a really good thing to accomplish during testing, is to see if players want to do something different, and maybe it's something that you think they should be able to do too, so maybe there's an alternate path there. Or maybe you just always intended there to be an alternate path, 2 ways to do something. And they don't necessarily have to be a good way or a bad way, they could just be different ways. And that actually adds to a lot of replayability. Even if there is a good way and a bad way, sometimes you're just like, well, I just want to see what happens if you do the bad way. Or maybe I'm a bad character, so I'm always going to do the bad way. So alternate paths are a great thing to include in your quests. Quest tracking. That is, how does the player know what quests they have and where they're happening? Where do I go? It says go to this town. Where's this town? This is a world that I have no idea about. Generally, games that tell you to go certain places will have either like a large world map or a mini map, or both. Markers on those maps are one way to telegraph to the player where they're supposed to be going. Sometimes there's just markers on the screen that say they're looking around. There's like a compass and it says go this way, so they know quickly, which direction to head right away. Some games will have like a glowing path that calculates the shortest distance, or it's a predetermined path that shows the player where to go. It's important to have consistency in this, though, and make sure that you don't just have one random quest that doesn't have these telegraphed things, because that would leave the player lost, because they were thought that this is how the game works, is I have to follow the path, and they can miss major things, unless it's supposed to be just like a hidden Easter egg or something like that. If it's like on the core happy path of things you want the players to be doing, and up until now you always give them map markers and a big glowing path and yellow paint on the top to show them where to climb the thing or whatever, it's best to keep things consistent, best practice for everything that's intended. Diegesis is an important concept to writing a narrative in general, and also applies to quest design. Now, so when something is diegetic, that means it's in worlds the characters experience it. If you hear music and the character doesn't, that's non-diegetic. That's external to you. But if the music you're hearing is on a radio in the game, and so the character can sing along and understands that they're hearing that, that's called diegetic. So often games will have music, but normally it's non-diegetic music. When the player can sing along and hears it too, that's diegetic. Often when they say something out loud, that will be diegetic, but if there's a narrator saying something, that's non-diegetic, unless you're Deadpool, and you can break the fourth wall, and that plays into that last line there. Breaking the fourth wall, this makes it so that it's the opposite, where you're diegetic to the character. And that's always fun, but it's best to keep that on a very rare occurrence, unless that's what it's all about, like a Deadpool or She-Hulk world where it's all about breaking the fourth wall. It's usually best to keep the fourth wall breaking in your back pocket for like a really great comedic moment, or a really disturbing one if you're making a horror game. Exposition is an important consideration when you're communicating ideas and themes, especially about the lore of your world, or what your quests are and what the characters or the players should be doing at this time. Overt exposition tends to be clunky, but it's quick, and it's rarely necessary. Overt exposition will just be like one character walking up and saying, "Oh no, the world is falling apart due to this scenario that we all already know about, but I'm only saying it because the player needs to be informed on what's going on. Now let's rescue this princess who you're also in love with," which is a weird thing to say, but the player needs to know. So that's, it's a little clunky, but it's being told to you. A better way to do overt exposition is to do like a narrator, just like in-docking you, introducing you to the world. That's pretty common. But like I said, it's rarely necessary, but it can be necessary just to, like, as a quick shorthand. Like, you got a narrator saying, this is the setting, but then you don't often hear the narrator throughout a whole story and that's the design, of course. More subtle exposition, I think Cyberpunk did this great, where they just throw you into the world and let the world speak for itself. And maybe you just happen to walk by a news report, and that's how you learn about something important in the world. Not because it's telling you, but because it's something that would be natural in the world, that people would be informed about the certain thing. They talk about that princess and the fact that, you were betrothed with her, but now, she's marrying this other guy or something like that. Just because it's that's the video that they're showing, or maybe there's just things lying around that give you an impression of, like, rather than just telling you there's a war, maybe you see the devastation of the war and there's bodies everywhere, that kind of thing. Now, I'd lean more towards subtle exposition whenever you can, but this is a design choice that should match the vision and theme of your game. That leads right into environmental storytelling. I was talking about the subtle exposition of maybe a war-torn world, and that lets the player know the world is war-torn. But environmental storytelling is just that, seeing what's around you and being able to understand a story because of that. Fallout is famous for this, because sometimes you'll see, like, a skeleton holding the hands of another skeleton, and then you realize that it was some sort of, like, love-death pact or something like that, or lots of skeleton references in that one, because sometimes there'll just be a bunch of drugs around a skeleton and be like, oh, they OD'd. And that's a story that's told to you, not in text, not in some journal you found, no character told you about it, you just saw it and you inferred from the information you saw. The environment can tell a story on its own. Like, if you see a city that's overgrown, and then there's a lot of things you can infer from that it's obviously not a lot of people just maintaining the city, for example, and that the wilderness is reclaiming it. Industrial areas you can infer a lot about a culture by the way the architecture is. If it's, like, very brutal and there's, like, a pristine castle on the hill and on the bottom there's a bunch of mud huts, then there's a big economic divide. Just little things like that you can pick up just by what the design of the world is and what's going on. And signs of activity, Like, if there's like a fishing boat out, or if there's a lot of food left out for a big festival or something like that. There's a lot of information that can be gained by seeing signs of activity that happened off screen. Maybe you walked into an apartment and it's trashed. You can infer a lot by that. If there's blood on the counter, you can infer a lot by that. Now, you might be wrong. Maybe the apartment, maybe there is trashed because there was a fight, or maybe the apartment is trashed because they're just really lazy people. Maybe there's blood on the counter because of the fight that I just mentioned, or maybe they just butchered something and they're just making food in the back, you know. You could be wrong about that inference, but it does bring stark emotion and a lot of assumptions when you see stuff like that. Now that we know a lot of the components about the quests, where they're going, what they're doing, how long they're doing it, what they're doing it for, what happens when you complete the quest, and how is that resolved? Does the story end or continue? If it was a side quest, maybe that part of the story ends. If it's a side quest with more parts or main quests, maybe that because you completed that quest, now you have what you need to move on to the next quest, the next leg of that quest. You have to consider whether this quest affects other quests. If I found a way to ward off werewolves in this quest, and that was the quest to ward off a werewolf, if I find another quest with a werewolf, will I be able to use that again? Is that something that you want them to be able to do? And if they did quest A, then in quest B, they get an extra option to, instead of shooting it with a silver bullet, they can just use the ward off thing again. That might make their choices and the order of you do things matter, or it might break it. It really depends on the quest design, and if you're working with other quest designers, that's something you should be discussing with them. Does it affect the whole world, even? Maybe it's not about what you did specifically to those people, but like greater consequences. The Witcher 3 had this a lot, where depending on which faction you decided to support, the ending would be different, whether it was like Redania becoming a big industrial nation, or Nilfgaard conquering large areas, or Skellige going to war with Nilfgaard, or Skellige becoming a prosperous farming colony, that sort of thing, based on what choices you made in the world. And what is a reward in your game? Is it just the satisfaction of completing the story? Maybe some people like you and you get a special ending that way. Is it an experience system? How much experience should you award? That should be in your quest design document and should be discussed with like system designers and other designers that are tangential to that sort of work. Is there loot in your world? What should they receive? What's fair? Do they get extra information? Maybe more lore about the world if they achieve it like extra well, or find the hidden quests and that sort of thing. These are also things that should be considered, standardized, kept in your design doc, and also well communicated with all other departments. Failure. Is failure possible in your game? Do you just go through the quest and it's always a success once you finish it? Or is there a failure where there's penalties or world consequences or personal consequences? That is also another thing to consider. And when designing the quests, who are these quests for? A consideration here could be the difference between single-player games, which I'm most familiar with. I'd say that's an easier thing an easier player base of single-player players to design games for, especially the quests. But there are games with quests that are cooperative, not quite multiplayer, but a second player can jump in. That say, like Elden Ring, those types of games, somebody can, like jump in and help you. And it's not completely multiplayer. There's not people running around the world the whole time. But is that something that you want to consider, having someone come in and help them? That'd be a more cooperative game, or if there's only a couple players, coming together, or it could be a full multiplayer game, whether it's like a small number of multiplayers. Baldur's Gate 3 has potential to have up to 4 players in it, and there's quite a few quests there, and they have to make special considerations for like who's turning in the quest, who's doing certain things in the quest. They had to make a special dialogue system where one player can be talking to someone else, while the other players can be doing other things at the same time, and that's going to affect your quests. A good example of that is there's a part where there's a gnome that's about to blow themselves up, and it's like, don't you take a step closer or I'll blow myself up. But if a player turns themselves invisible while that person's talking to them, walks up and takes their explosives, then when they try to blow themselves up, it doesn't happen. They're like, what? Where'd it go? In the middle of their conversation, and those are things that you would have to account for when designing quests if there's multiple players. One thing that I want to do in one of my future multiplayer games is make it so that it's pretty easy for multiple players to enter and add dialogue to those conversations. Rather than a lot of games, what they'll do is like if there's multiplayers, it'll be one person saying the dialogue, and other players can like vote on which option they want them to say. I'd like it to be like a 3-way, 4-way, 5-way conversation. I think that'd be pretty cool. Something that I would like to see in the future. Let's talk about the power of immersion. Immersion is one of my favorite aspects of games. Quests are probably one of the best ways to help immerse players, because they're given something to do, and if the world has like a story, a theme, and lore, then it can easily make the player feel like they're the character in that world doing the thing. So there's different levels. Some games barely have any immersion or no immersion at all. It's like you are playing a game. Like, it's hard to be immersed into like Tetris. Like, are you in a world of blocks? What's happening here? Like, you can try to infer a story with like the Russian theme and stuff like that. But there's not really, it's all game systems, right? There's lots of games that are just very gamey. And then there's games that with partial immersion. These are games that, have a world, have like story and stuff like that and characters, but it's just completely covered in game systems. There's bars everywhere. Everything's about numbers flying up, and it's about systems, and there's just a lot of internal jargon that's about the game systems. When a game is spoken about using the game systems and not the lore of the world, I consider that more of a partial immersion, mixed interfaced kind of game. When the players have like no opportunity to really role play. There's quite a few games like that. I'd say that actually most games are like that. But then there's more fully immersive games where people talk about the characters and the lore, the choices they make. These are more the games that I'm into. They're very popular. Some of them are big blockbusters, but a lot of indie titles are like this as well. You try to downplay the systems or make them feel diegetic. Like a good example of making a system diegetic would be Dead Space, where his health meter is actually on his suit, showing how much power it has left. And that's something that's actually in the world, and that helps build the immersion, while at the same time showing a system to the player. But it's full immersion is world first, and no immersion is systems first. Ludonarrative is another concept to know very well when you're a quest designer. So ludonarrative, often referred to in the phrase ludonarrative dissonance, that's only half of it though. So ludonarrative means, ludo being, I think, Greek, so pardon me if I'm wrong there, for game, the game narrative, the story. So ludonarrative dissonance being a misalignment. It's where the systems of the game and the lore in the game are kind of at a mismatch. Like, we're told that this thing happens, like, I'd say a common ludonarrative dissonance these days would be that the character's told, you have, you're gonna die soon. You're gonna die. You've got a virus, or there's something in your head, or there's a ticking time bomb. But that thing never occurs. It's just trying to push the player to progress. But if you sit around for 1,000 days, you don't die. Then there's a misalignment there, right? Like, I thought I had to push forward, but I don't. The narrative misaligns with the systems. Now, I would call the opposite of that, which I'd like to draw attention to, ludonarrative harmony. When what you say happens is how it actually happens. How when I say, that this event needs a certain set of scenarios to occur, and it only occurs in those certain set of scenarios, then you're in ludonarrative harmony. If the example I gave earlier, if you do just sit around when you've got that bug in your head, or the bomb in your chest or whatever, then you explode. That's the ludonarrative harmony. Now, just if you don't want to put that pressure on them, just don't tell them that. Make a better story. You're in control. You can always change the story or tweak it a little bit, or give an explanation of why you were actually wrong and it was an unreliable. You've heard of unreliable narrator. There's the unreliable Ludo narrator. That's a term I just coined, I think. But I'd say work towards ludonarrative harmony, where your story and your systems actually align, and that the big bad monsters are actually hard to fight, not easy to fight, and the easy things are actually easy, not hard. And that you're just not constantly lying to the player with the in-game, in the in-universe story. Highly recommend playing it that way. Emergence is another consideration. So as a quest designer, you're trying to set up scenarios for what the player should do. Now, Emergence is almost kind of the opposite of it, but it's also a very good thing. It's where the player decides that they should do something. But it's not necessarily what the quest designer had in mind. And some games are designed in a specific way to allow for emergence, emergent gameplay. It's unintentional quests, things that the player can do that are interesting to them and that are fun to them, that weren't fully scripted out that way by the designer. But the designer can script it out in a way that to be conducive for emergence. Things like stacking boxes to get to a spot they shouldn't be able to get to, or certain use of items in an unusual context that instead of glitching out just lets the player do it, whatever that scenario happens to be. It allows the player to design their own fun. Some games work against emergence and only want you to do the certain number of things the designers want to do, and that's perfectly fine to design a game that way. That's their vision. But there's something to be said about games that allow for emergent gameplay, because then the player gets to design their own fun, and you're going to see a lot of cool YouTube videos of whatever they came up with. Sort of on the similar vein as that, but also on the opposite side of the coin in another way, there's quests and speedrunners. Now, speedrunners, I'm really talking about extreme users, and speedrunners are probably the best example of that. Now, what a speedrunner is somebody who, in a way, try to subvert quests as much as possible, because the goal of a speedrunner is to get to the end credits or another scenario in the game as fast as possible. And usually that involves, glitching through things, skipping dialogue, skipping entire areas in the game, going through like wall hacks or other exploits in the game just to get the game finished. Now, most games, the intent isn't to finish it as fast as possible, but to experience certain things. Now, there might be quests with speed limits and that type of thing, but usually that's not played into for the speedrunners. Normally, you're trying to circumvent even those quests. So this is also, in a way, an emergent gameplay. And some designers might see speedrunners as almost a hostile emergent gameplay, but the way I look at it, I think they should meet the challenge. And it's also always great to see like a 50-hour game completed in 14 minutes or something like that. It's always interesting to see where the exploits are, and sometimes those can be patched out. Sometimes they're things that are actually bugs in the game that shouldn't be there in the first place, but it's really fun that people try this sort of thing. It definitely pits intent versus their innovation. It's also great, but I think as a quest designer, I think it's healthy to see speedrunners as almost your adversary. Make it so that they can't speedrun. Now they will overcome you, but that's the challenge, right? I think they want you to be challenging them in that way. because that's the point, is to make what they do hard so that when they do it, it seems like more of an accomplishment. So try to make it so that your quest vision gets fulfilled as much as possible. Try not to leave in little hacks for speedrunners to get around it, and I think they will generally appreciate that. Now here's an advanced tip. Maya. Now I learned this from a video by Pavel Sasko. He's he was the lead quest designer for CD Projekt Red, but I believe he is now like a highfalutin director, which is phenomenal because he is one of the best quest designers in the world. So the tip is Maya. This is a design idea, most advanced yet acceptable. This is something that you should be pushing yourself to in your quest design whenever you can. Basically, that means you got to balance the familiarity with the novelty. So when you design a quest, when you make systems for a game, you want it to be familiar enough to the player where they know what to do, where it's not so alien that they just outright reject the idea. But at the same time, you want it to be really advanced. You want it to be novel and new and exciting. So there's this delicate balance where you're showing them something new, but with familiar elements. You got to take the familiar tools, but then you enhance it. And this is how you push yourself to become a more advanced and better quest designer, is to give the player an experience that they feel comfortable going through because of the familiarity, and yet excites them because of the novelty. And as you advance with game design, you will feel that out, and it will become second nature and your driving goal. Now you've designed a bunch of quests, you iterated them, you put them through the game, you tested them, you've launched the game, so your job's done, right? No, absolutely not. Quest design lives forever. Let's talk about continuous quest design. So patches and updates to your game. You want to make sure and advocate for your currently quests, you fix any bugs that exist in those quests, but also make sure that patches and upgrades and updates don't break your quests. So make sure that you safeguard and protect those quests, look out for each other, talk with each other and the other teams when they patch and update things. And I would, any quests, especially quests you do, but quests in general, after a patch goes out, go through and test them again, play them, make sure that they're actually still working. Now that should have been done way before the patch went out, but always advocate for your quests, because you should see yourself as the custodian, guardian, to make sure that their integrity is kept up through the entire life cycle of your game. Now, DLCs and expansion, those are opportunities to add new quests to the same game, effectively. Now, it's adding new stuff, so there could be new types of quests. Maybe your quest design document, your master might be different for the DLCs and expansion, and the quests feel different for those. Maybe they're supposed to be a different feel, or maybe they are supposed to feel exactly like the base game, and you want to keep those, the integrity and hit those milestones as well. Just be on the same page as your team and design your quests in that fashion. Sequels and prequels, similar concepts. It's more likely for that quest design document to ask for different types of quests. However, it's still the same intellectual property if that's what you're doing, if it's a sequel or prequel. So there should be some key signifiers there, some like hallmarks of the game, but likely your core master quest design document will call for some changes that matches what that game is trying to accomplish, and make sure that you accomplish that with those quests. Hello, I am now on the other side of the screen. This is the conclusion of this primer. Now, if you just jumped here from the beginning of the primer, that means you took the alternate path to completing the video here, and thank you for that. But however, if you listen to the whole thing, thank you so much for bearing with me throughout this entire tutorial. So now I'll give you what I promised. What is quest design? My personal definition for that is it's where vision meets fun. The vision, the whole idea behind the game, meets what the players, what drives the players, what they're expecting. When those two things align, that means you succeeded as a quest designer. I'm David Tavares. If you'd like to support me, please see the links here. I have my LinkedIn, my YouTube channel for other videos, and my Patreon. I can really use the support. Thank you, and have a good one.